Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a retired British Army colonel, former commander of NATO's and UK's chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear reaction troops. Welcome to our program, Colonel Hamish.
Thank you very much for having me.
US President Donald Trump says that he has made a decision on sending Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. Do you feel that this could be another turning point in this war and big blow for Vladimir Putin?
I think the Tomahawk cruise missiles will be a huge turning point in this war. And the fact that even President Putin has said that Tomahawk missiles will really be a very serious issue, I think that underwrites quite how terrified the Russians are by this. I mean, these weapons have been around for a long time, but they're not old. They're always updated. And with a range up to 2,000 kilometers, we're pretty certain the Russians will find it very, very difficult to shoot them down or interdict them. That extends the ability for the Ukraine forces to attack deep into Russia. We've seen how effective Ukraine has been at attacking a couple of hundred kilometers into Russia with the weapon they have, the Storm Shadows, the ATACMS and the HIMARS. And that is, pretty much brought the oil refining, the petrol producing distribution network in Russia to its knees now with having these cruise missiles, the Tomahawk missiles. That is hugely significant. They carry a very heavy warhead. And I think Donald Trump asked President Zelenskyy a month or so ago whether he would attack the Kremlin. If the president decided to attack the Kremlin, then cruise missile would be the absolute ideal weapon to do that. So, yeah, I know we try and avoid the word of a game-changing weapon, but cruise missiles have been hugely effective across the Middle East, across the world. And I think that it would really change the metrics. And maybe this is the thing that is eventually going to bring the Russians and Putin to the peace negotiation table.
You just mentioned about the possible attack on the Kremlin, Russia's governmental buildings. Recently, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy just said that if Russia is not ready to end this war against Ukraine, then Russian officials should try and find the nearest shelters near their buildings and homes to try to hide themselves, protect against Ukrainian missiles, drones. Do you see this as another message to Vladimir Putin that Ukraine is ready to conduct such attacks on Kremlin and on other the so-called the decision-making places?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it is. It's pretty clear that the Russians, certainly Putin and his leaders sat in the Kremlin, care very little for civilian casualties across Russia, and really don't care much for their population. That they don't have enough money to buy basic foodstuffs. They now can't buy any petrol. But that doesn't seem to concern Putin and his generals at all. But if they knew that the possibility that actually they might get a cruise missile through the window of the Kremlin, that might well change things markedly. Because I don't really know how Russia can escalate. We've seen some of the devastating attacks, up to 500 drones and missiles being fired into Ukraine every night. Now, I think that is the Russians are absolutely full speed, as it were. I'm not sure where they can go from there. And I think if the way that, Putin and his leaders are a little bit cowardly, I think, because they've taken a lot of the air defense weapons off the front line to protect themselves. But I don't think their S-400s and S-500s are not going to be any good against cruise missiles. So I think Zelensky's been very wise there to really put Putin on notice that, if he doesn't come to the peace table, then those cruise missiles might well be going to his home rather to the homes of Russian people who are struggling like everybody else is.
However, according to the British newspaper Times, Vladimir Putin has at least 3 secret bunkers where he does operate independently in three different locations, which are similar because of the design. The design of these locations, bunkers, are similar just to create the image of one place where Vladimir Putin makes all decisions, and these places are also being used for these films and videos with Russian dictator Putin. Don't you think that it would be at least difficult for Ukraine to identify this place with Putin and target it in case of such a decision?
Well, certainly, and one would expect no less that Putin has various places he can go and hide in and do his work. And I expect some of these bunkers are very deep below the ground that even a Storm Shadow or a cruise missile Tomahawk probably couldn't get to. But that not all of the Russians can hide in these bunkers. And I think, if key strategic Russian military buildings and government buildings are attacked by Ukraine, then that will have a huge impact. I'm sure nobody's directly trying to kill Putin himself. But he might be able to hide underground and be safe there. But, if the rest of those around him who are fighting this illegal war against Ukraine start being killed, and of course a number of senior Russian generals have been killed, I think that will have an impact because, Putin can't just sit in his bunker on his own like Hitler did at the end of the Second World War. He can hide for so long. So one would anticipate that as leaders across the world. I'm sure President Trump has several bunkers deep underground that he could hide into, command and control his forces. So I think that's not unrealistic. Whether the Ukraine Security Service, Secret Service know about these places, who knows? But they probably know where the tops of them are. But these will be deep underground and very, very well protected. But I don't think that's the overarching issue. I think the Ukraine targeters, Ukraine's Secret Service know exactly where the Kremlin is, and I expect that is a potential strategic target that would change the metrics of what the Kremlin and what Putin would do. And I agree with others that this is the best chance at the moment to get the Russians and Putin around the table to negotiate a ceasefire and a peace deal.
Also, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin said that if the US supplied Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, this would lead to the destruction of US-Russia relationship. What is your take on that, and could this threat work with President Trump?
Well, I don't think it's a threat of war as such. I think it's more, a relationship. We've seen over the last few months, and we saw at the meeting in Alaska between Putin and Trump, there was lots of talks about doing trade deals and business deals and all the rest of it. And in the past, it's commonly known that Trump has done deals with Russian oligarchs, and Trump has liked Russian oligarchs' money, and they still have a hell of a lot of it. However, having said that, when it comes to doing business deals, commercial deals, actually, the Russian economy is pretty tiny and has always been pretty insignificant to America. And Trump at the moment seems to be, his main line is to try and get as much money for the American economy as possible. But he probably realizes and knows that he's not going to get a lot of that from Russia. So the fact that the relations will be broken off, I would hope that doesn't change the metrics because I don't suppose America wants to buy anything off Russia, and if Russia's not in a position to buy much off America, the way that Trump seems to do business around deals and around financial deals, one would assume he'd just go, well, that's tough, so what? What is the most important thing, it seems at the moment, is Trump wants to get these peace deals. He seems to be leading the way at the moment in the Middle East. He's claimed to have stopped 6 wars already. I think he knows if he can stop the war in Ukraine, his much coveted Nobel Peace Prize, is a given. He'll get it. So I think the most important thing for Trump, and I hope the most important thing for Trump, is peace in Ukraine and a just peace for the people of Ukraine.
Let's cover also new results of Ukrainian deep strike campaign against Russia's oil refineries. Ukrainian drones have knocked out nearly 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity, according to new estimates reported by the Moscow Times. What is your assessment of this, and could Vladimir Putin sustain such pressure for a while?
Well, I think, first of all, this is a brilliant strategic tactic by the Ukrainian military, because this is really hurting Russia. It's not hurting Putin, it's not hurting the leaders, it's not hurting the oligarchs, but it's hurting the common people in Russia who now can't get fuel. We're seeing pictures of 2 or 3 kilometer queues to get fuel, get petrol in Russia. And I think most significantly, we learned at the end of last week that Russia is now having to import petrol from abroad, which is hugely significant because Russia gets the majority of its foreign currency and the majority of its money to keep its war machine going from selling oil and petrol outside. So now actually, Russia is not getting that money because it can't, and it's having to pay more money to import petrol. So yeah, I think this is a absolutely brilliant tactic by the Ukraine targeteers, and it's really bringing the war to the people across Russia who cannot get fuel. And if they can get petrol, it's hugely expensive, and the Russian people are struggling anyway because food is expensive, inflation's high, interest rates are high. This is likely to cripple the Russian economy if it goes on for any significant length of time. And I assume that Ukraine will keep attacking the oil industry, and having destroyed it by 40%, I mean, that's going to take a long, long time for the Russians to rebuild it. So yeah, a very, very smart move, I think, by Ukraine.
Do you feel that this could be the best strategy to bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table?
Well, not directly, because I don't suppose Putin buys any petrol himself or his oligarchs, but it is the Russian people. And the Russian people who've been pretty quiet hitherto, back in the 80s, when the Russians lost a lot of people in Afghanistan, the people of Russia marched on the Kremlin and demanded Russia to withdraw. But we know, and we've discussed before, Russia has lost over 1 million men in this fight. But it's kept that sort of quiet from the population. What it can't keep quiet is the fact that the Russian oil industry is being destroyed by Ukraine drones and missiles. And everybody in Russia virtually needs petrol to run their cars, and they can't get it. So I think this is, really, really significant. It's not affecting Putin, not directly, but it could indirectly if people suddenly realize that what he's doing is driving the country literally into the ground. And so actually, indirectly, it might well affect him if the people realize this and march on the Kremlin as they did back in the 80s.
Could this also turn Putin's inner circle and oligarch against this Putin's war effort in Ukraine?
Well, I think there are murmurings that there is discontent within this inner group, and there must be. I mean, they realize what's happening here, and they realize, the gold standard of the Russian economy is their oil. That's where they get all their money from, and that it's been destroyed. So it's cutting off the lifeblood. All these oligarchs who get millions and billions of dollars via the oil industry given to them by Putin and elsewhere are suddenly realizing that money is drying up. And actually, the Russian government is having to spend billions to import oil now. So yeah, I think this is getting really, really serious for the Russians. And let's hope that Putin has a modicum of sense, a modicum of morality, and decides to come to the peace negotiation table before the Russian economy completely crashes.
Also, it's interesting that yesterday was Vladimir Putin's birthday. Was this a happy birthday, from your opinion?
Well, it was certainly very interesting following it on social media, on X and other places, it would appear that most people in the world did not wish President Putin a happy birthday. Of course, the Russian propaganda machine was in overdrive. But at 73, you would have thought Putin would be thinking of retiring. But I think he's got himself into such a difficult position that, he would not get a happy retirement. So, I think it's pretty clear that most people in the world did not wish him a happy birthday yesterday. And really, the best thing he could do, and let's hope that if he has another birthday, if he, by his next birthday, he's realized that actually the best way is a just peace in Ukraine, and he can focus on rebuilding Russia, which he has pretty much destroyed over the last 3 years.
Don't you think that people around Vladimir Putin were just didn't have any other choice but to congratulate him and wish him all the best, because they just cannot afford to say no to him and are afraid of losing his attention, his friendly ties with him?
Absolutely, yeah. They're all sycophants. I mean, he is a dictator, and they bow to him. But a bit like Julius Caesar and Brutus, it might well be that actually, if they get the chance, they might do what Brutus did to Julius Caesar and stab him in the back. But at the moment, they realise that the only thing they can do is praise him, because as a Russian dictator, we know that he's completely ruthless and gets rid of anybody close to him who doesn't agree. Prigozhin, we remember very clearly, who opposed Putin, and Putin blew up his aeroplane and killed him and his close staff. So, this is a dictator, and hopefully he will meet a dictator's end, and let's hope it's sooner rather than later.
Also, it's interesting that yesterday, during his birthday, Putin held Security Council meeting, very serious meeting with his senior officials in the matter of security. But the main topic which was discussed, for the number one priority of yesterday's agenda, was the security of information infrastructure, something like this. But it's so interesting and funny that the first priority was not the protection of energy sites or refining sites, but the protection of Russia's information infrastructure. What could this mean? Does this mean that Putin is so afraid, so embarrassed to reveal that they have another priorities?
Well, yeah, and interesting that it wasn't protecting civilians, people. I think the whole Russian system runs on propaganda and disinformation. And if that's affected, then that will affect the way they do business. I think it's also to do with the sort of cyber warfare. It was only last week that the previous head of MI5 rather, Dame Manningham-Buller, suggested that Britain in particular was already in hybrid war with Russia, cyber and espionage. And actually, we now know that cyber warfare can be far more damaging than any sort of bombs and bullets and missiles and drones. And Putin has realized that's a real weak point. With Ukraine, with the West's help in the cyber field, could possibly bring Russia to its knees. We've already seen cyber attacks affecting Aeroflot operation, the Russian airline, being unable to fly around Russia, and everything else. Even in Russia, everything is run electronically and via the internet. So Putin is realizing that this is a particular really weak underbelly of his, and he wants to protect that. But I think it says a heck of a lot that he doesn't even mention protecting civilians. Let's hope the Russian people really understand what his priorities are, and they're certainly not the population of Russia.
Also, recently, Professor Michael Clark, Sky News military analyst, said that Ukraine could launch another offensive attack on Crimea before the winter. What is your assessment of such a possibility?
Well, I think it's certainly possible. When I look at it with my sort of military hat on purely, there would appear to be certain vulnerabilities. We know that the Ukraine targeteers have already taken out a number of key radar areas, which would allow Ukraine forces some sort of freedom of maneuver. The Kerch Bridge is always talked about, and it would appear that Ukraine now has the missiles and the drones to be able to take this out. I mean, and certainly if they have Tomahawk cruise missiles, they would easily take out the Kerch Bridge, which would then isolate Crimea. So, who knows? It's certainly a possibility, and I think the main thing, it's giving Russia an awful lot to think about. The Russian army, as we discussed last week, in my opinion, has run out of steam. So this might well be a really opportune time to attack, because I don't think the Russian army has the ability to maneuver and counterattack. And if Ukraine can put sufficient force towards Crimea, I agree with Professor Clark that it is potentially something that the Ukraine military could realize. Whether it's this year, who knows? But quite possibly. And I'm sure, like Professor Clark, really hopes that Ukraine could achieve this.
Also, do you feel that this would be a great push to bring Putin to the negotiating table to change this balance on the ground? And would you feel that do you feel that President Trump could be in favor of that? Because according to Wall Street Journal, President Trump has changed his position on Ukraine, because some counteroffensive plans of Ukraine has been revealed for President Trump. He was told that Ukraine would prepare some offensive operations. Do you feel that Trump would also be supportive of such offensives and attacks inside Russia?
Well, certainly, if all those things come together, it's very, very possible. And quite often, the best form of defense is attack. And if Ukraine could recover Crimea, it would massively affect the Russian forces, because all the forces in the Donbass and Zaporizhzhia and in those areas would have to be resupplied in a much more difficult way. It would make the Russian forces very difficult to sustain and very unbalanced. And if President Trump decides to help and enable the Ukraine counteroffensive to Crimea, I would say it would have a realistic chance of success, and that may well be the catalyst again to get Putin to negotiate, because losing Crimea would be a significant blow to all Putin's aims, and it is probably more likely that Ukraine could retake Crimea rather than some of the areas in the Donbass at the moment.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for having me, and glory to Ukraine.